What's going on, guys? Andrew of New York Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 78. Now, much like the last episode, we get a whole lot of focus put onto Kengo, aka Blood Sheppard, as I'll mostly be referring to him as. He and Revolver, I often have a lot of trouble remembering what their, quote-unquote, out-of-link Vrains names are. So moving right along with that, we find out that he's had growing suspicions of Soul Technologies. Now, being someone who hates AIs, and he's aware the company he's working for is the company that basically commissioned for the Ignises to be made in the first place, and they're a company whose primary profits come from something like Link Vrains, which more or less indirectly encourages the use of AIs and the cooperation between human and technology, codependence, those types of things. I can't really blame him for being suspicious, but I'm almost in some ways a little bit surprised that he signed up for the gig in the first place, although we do find out that he basically did it under false pretenses. It was under his idea that they were going to be hunting down these Ignises to just kill them. We figure out Soul has some slightly different ideas in mind for that, but just starting with the pieces that you have from Blood Sheppard in the beginning of this episode, you know that you're hunting these AIs. You probably know that they just dissected the Earth Ignis. They killed him, but at the same time, in killing him, it was more so just a secondary of effect that they recoded his data into a way that they could actually interpret it, which, why are you going to do that if you don't plan on using that data for something? Then you also see the fact that they're testing a AI and human hybrid with your fellow bounty hunter, Go Onizuka, and I'd be going pretty suspicious if I were him too. Once more, his main objective is to get rid of all these AIs, right? He doesn't trust them. He doesn't like the idea that humanity is growing increasingly dependent on them. So with that being the case, why on earth would you want something to happen that is showing repeated deaths and data gathering that essentially which leads you to believe they want to recreate something with the Ignises themselves? And he actually ends up going to Akira about this. And that to me tells me just a little bit about the character relationship they have there. We have to keep in mind that Blood Sheppard is a well-established bounty hunter within this universe. In order for you to survive in a field like that, where the legality of a lot of what you're doing is somewhat shaky, and you're basically taking a lone wolf mentality, everything, you have to be a pretty good judge of people and how to read them, who you can trust, who you can't, and how far they will go with things. The fact that he goes to Akira strikes me as the fact that Blood Sheppard is reading Akira as somebody who is on very shaky grounds with Soul Technologies and is very untrusting of him himself. So it just kind of reaffirms a lot of what I've been theorizing, in that Akira at some point here or another I think may end up bending against Soul Technologies. So when he goes to Akira, what we find out is Akira's discovered Soul wants to make their own AIs. And part of me is really wondering if that's what we're going to be heading towards as kind of our climax of Link Vrains, is Soul goes to make their own AI, and they maybe by accident end up creating this great overarching evil, kind of like in classic Duel Monsters fashion, where there's this greater evil at play than the main character and main antagonist, and our supposed main antagonist and main character end up needing to work together to defeat the greater evil, or something along those lines. That could very much happen. It's been kind of a common theme throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of Duel Monsters, having it happen with Good Merrick and Yugi needing to work together to take out Yami Merrick, or when they all needed to gather to take down Bakura's dark form in the Millennium World arc. We also have examples from Zexal, like when Yuma and Shark, who were theoretically on opposite sides, needed to work together to take down Don Thousand, those types of things. So it's definitely a track Yu-Gi-Oh! Writers like to go. I could see them doing that here. Soul Technologies makes their own Ignis. The Ignis goes bad for some reason, and then suddenly we have, say, Yusaku and the Queen, who are fighting each other, needing to work together temporarily in order to take down this Ignis. They're still at a philosophical conflict, so then they have to have a duel, and it ends something with Yusaku winning and them all coming to good terms or something like that. That's very much a possibility, especially considering I think they're basically writing it on the wall for us at this point. Soul Technologies, don't trust them. They're going to be bad at some point. It just hasn't fully happened yet. So this just contributes further to that. And now, on the contrary to the whole idea of Akira eventually betraying Soul Technologies, he seems to really iterate to Blood Sheppard here that he's essentially a lapdog just doing his job, and he's not going to jump off of that right away. Now, that being said, I do think he's just a couple pushes in his motivation away from hopping ship away from them and starting to act as kind of a mole within the company. And for all we know, maybe he is Revolver's mole right now. I mean, it's kind of hard to say, especially considering the fact that during Revolver and Blood Sheppard's encounters within this episode, it would imply to me that Blood Sheppard is most certainly not the mole within Soul Technologies that Revolver's got going on, because otherwise they would know each other and Blood Sheppard wouldn't be questioning how Revolver knows everything about him and those types of things. Speaking of which, we find out Revolver and Spectre actually know Blood Sheppard's identity in the real world. Once more reaffirming, Revolver's whole smirk to Yusaku when asked about whether he has a mole within Soul Technologies. most likely true, otherwise how would he know Blood Sheppard's identity? Granted, that could just be obtained from good hacking, maybe tracing some patterns, those types of things. Revolver and Spectre, though, also imply they see Blood Sheppard as being a very dangerous adversary if they can't get him on their side. Now, a couple things to point out about this. I don't think it's the greatest of writing. I would rather just see Blood Sheppard do something that could write him off as being dangerous, like demonstrate his power with a big win in a duel, because he beat Emma, but Emma hadn't won any duels before this, so, but at the same time, I'm glad they're at least acknowledging the fact in some way, other than him just being like, yeah, I have a big reputation, I'm this really good bounty hunter. They're having other characters do it, so halfway decent writing there. Still want to see this guy get a big win if he's as powerful as everyone's writing him off to be. But I think some of this also has to do with the fact that, like, outside of his dueling prowess, he's a good hacker, which means he could be somebody that stands in Revolver's way. I mean, in terms of the eventual endgame of what he aims to do, he still has to deal with Playmaker and Kusanagi, who are both very respectable hackers in their own right, and gave Revolver a pretty good run for his money during the whole Tower of Hanoi arc. So moving past that, we also have the fact that even Revolver acknowledges Blood Sheppard has this bad taste for revenge in his mouth. And once these Ignises are settled out, or he's just kind of gets confused a little bit, he's basically just a fuming bottle of rage. He's still angry, but he doesn't know why he's angry, and without anywhere to direct that, he can become very dangerous to those around him, because then it's just kind of like you're looking for a reason to just unleash that anger. And I think that's what the state that we see Blood Sheppard in this episode to some extent already. He's getting angry at Revolver when theoretically, aren't they basically on the same side? I mean, they both want to destroy the Ignises, they're both kind of against this whole cooperation thing, none of them like soul technologies. I mean, what exactly is going on here that would make Blood Sheppard think that he can't go with Revolver, unless it is kind of those old bounty hunter instincts telling him Revolver isn't worth trusting? That I can kind of respect, because it does seem to me like Revolver more or less intends to possibly use him as a pawn of sorts, but I also get the impression, based on what we've seen of Revolver's dealing with Yusaku, is there is some, like, honorable type of business practice, like, residing within him, in that he's not going to necessarily just stab you in the back if he has a respect for you. He does seek to handle things in a somewhat respectable manner, as long as he's not putting his cause in a direct risk. So I don't think he would necessarily backstab, like, Blood Sheppard down the road if they were working together, but I could see him kind of going their separate ways, or eventually coming to a conflict over something or another. Very hard to say. So that's going to bring us into the duel between Revolver and, what's his name? Blood Sheppard. Now, essentially how this happens is Revolver goes to Blood Sheppard with the whole case of, hey man, we got basically the same cause here. Why don't we work together? I'm a good hacker, you're a good hacker, I'm a good duelist, you're a pretty decent duelist, let's make this happen. Blood Sheppard's very, very weary of going along with Revolver. So with that being the case, they end up duking it out in a duel. Blood Sheppard tries to use his whole normal countdown gimmick, doesn't work whatsoever against Revolver. Revolver manages to stop him and then OTKs him. Now, a couple quick points about this duel. A, we get an OTK from Revolver. I think it's helping to build up his power, the fact that he really knows what he's doing with this new synchro summoning monster that he's got in his hands, and I think that new Borolo dragon that is synchro summoned, I'm blanking on the name off the top of my head here, is definitely his new ace. I mean, the ability to negate effects just by using Boral counters, the fact that it can easily get its attack well over to 4,000 would write it off that way pretty darn well. Also, adding to that, he uses a trap called Imperial Order to win this duel. Earlier in the Vrains anime, we had him using the trap Mirror Force. Both of these, back in their day, and to some extent still now, especially with Imperial Order, were very powerful traps within the TCG. They were like some of the classic, original, holy crap, what am I facing type of trap cards in the game that you really just had to be weary of and be aware that, okay, my opponent can flip this on me at any time. So I think the show writers are doing a good job kind of calling back to that. I think it also goes hand in hand to some extent with the success of Duel Links, which calls back more, it's like a nice blend of the older card game and the newer card game in terms of what cards are good and what cards aren't, because it does simplify the game to some extent. And I think Imperial Order and Mirror Force being mixed in as these powerful cards within Vrains also shows that. I think it also shows that Revolver's managing to evolve his dueling to wrap around facing his specific enemy. Now, from an actual real-life deck building perspective, most of the time you don't want to build a deck to face a specific other deck, or you're going to find yourself in a very iffy situation as soon as you start to face anything that has any variety, anything that deviates from that single deck you built your deck to face. Although in formats where you're dealing with like one or two decks, I guess that might be a little bit more viable. But when it comes to a show like this, and you're just looking at it from a tactical perspective, Revolver knows primarily who he's going to be dueling against, and that's going to be these Ignises who are using link spells. So a card like Imperial Order that outright blocks out spell effects, very smart on his part to add to the deck. It sets him up for a good win next time. He did manage to beat Windy, but it did put him into a little bit of a corner there. There were a couple times where I think Revolver might have gotten just a little bit nervous, even if he didn't show it. So moving right along from all of our duel topics there, let's get back to the whole idea that Revolver does approach Blood Sheppard about joining up in his cause, like fighting alongside the Knights of Hanoi. Why does he do that? Well, he wants Blood Sheppard in particular more so because of his hacking skills than anything else. We have to consider, at least for the time being, where these other Ignises like Lightning are a threat, Yusaku and Kusanagi seem willing to work with Revolver at least to some extent. After all, Yusaku outright took the program from Revolver without any questions and inserted it into his dual disc that was going to protect him from Lightning's hacking. So I think there is a mutual understanding between them that they're going to have to work together in order to deal with the bigger enemy at hand. So Revolver is essentially trying to put together an elite team of hackers. Blood Sheppard is next on his list. Now, why exactly does he need this elite team of hackers? He keeps referencing this bigger plan he has to do to draw Lightning out. The issue they're having right now is that they can't find where he is. We even see our main pro tags in Yusaku, Aoi, and Soulburner visit the old site where Aqua was being stored, see if there's any data like left over that they could use to trace Lightning's location. Even they're finding nothing. This guy's doing a really good job covering his tracks. So Revolver instead has the idea of using something to bait him out. The question becomes, what is that, and why are you going to need such skilled hackers in order to do it? Part of me genuinely wonders if it has something to do with building a second Tower of Hanoi. If we look at it, I believe it's the opening of the show right now, they show the Tower of Hanoi again. If it's not the opening, it's the ending. And so if that's the case, maybe they're referencing that Revolver plans on reviving this tower in order to draw Lightning out. After all, the Ignises survive within the Vrains environment, right? So if that environment's destroyed, Lightning is going to not really have anywhere he can hide anymore. I mean, even though we do have characters like I existing within the real world, it's a lot harder for him to hide within there because the real world isn't comprised of data, which is what these Ignises are masters of manipulating the way that the Link Vrains world is. So if he uses the Tower of Hanoi to create a threat to destroying Lightning's hiding place, Lightning's going to have to respond to that, otherwise he's going to find himself like a fish out of water, where he's basically subject to being attacked by everybody all at once. There's nowhere left for him to run or for him to hide. Now, why would he need these skilled hackers to do it? Well, perhaps he just needs their help in reconstructing it, perhaps he needs a more foolproof version to do it, perhaps he's just trying to create the illusion of the Tower of Hanoi. After all, I think he's going to be at least somewhat hard-pressed if this is his plan to get Yusaku fully on board with doing another Tower of Hanoi, if he plans on using him, or getting anybody for that matter, other than perhaps somebody such as Blood Sheppard, since he's so against the AI, because most of these characters that are involved at this point that are at least sort of on Revolver's side don't necessarily want to see all of Link Vrains destroyed, they instead just want to see Lightning beat, right? So maybe he needs these skilled hackers in order to create a strong enough illusion of a Tower of Hanoi that Lightning would believe it's there, even if it isn't necessarily. Regardless, the idea of using some shape or form of the Tower of Hanoi to draw Lightning out, I think, is very probable. Other options could definitely be just like maybe he's trying to get the elite team together because he figures if all of them put their brains together, they can rack through the Link Vrains data and eventually find Lightning. It could be as simple as that, or it could be taking a much more dramatic action. We'll just have to wait and find out. On the whole, guys, I would say this is a pretty good episode. I like the fact that we're spending some more time with these side characters. It was another episode we had in a row where we didn't have a whole lot of playmaker action. Really digging that because it shows that they're acknowledging, wait a second, we made Season 1 a little too playmaker-centric, and I'm just appreciating the show a lot more as a whole right now. I think Vrains is kind of hitting its stride with things, and I think these next couple episodes are really going to continue to be good. They've set themselves up in a very strong position for that. As always, be sure to let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome, and I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains content.